Good morning.
Morning.
I drove down yesterday with my wife, and we had a conversation on the way down. And the conversation went something like this. And it was, my wife said, well, you know, I looked at your report, and the introduction is titled Bleak. And she said, you know, I've been married to you for a long time, and you're probably the most negative person that I know. And she said, you know, there are times when it just drives me up the wall. You never can put a positive spin on things. Particularly, she said, in regard to what you do. Now, the end of the conversation, or I should say lecture, was essentially, she said, look, Mac, this time, since at your age you may not be back again, try and be a little positive in what you report to you folks today at the convention. Now, you know, I just want to ask you a question. And that is, now I want to quote something. And it's from a case that I'm going to talk about in a minute. And the quotation goes like this: it is the inevitable result of today's decision that there will be under-enforcement of federal and state statutes designed to advance the well-being of vulnerable workers. Now, if you sat around every day and you read stuff like that every day, on just about every page you turned in reading court decisions or agency decisions, how in the hell would you wind up saying something positive? Well, I got an idea. Well, before I talk to you about that idea, let me tell you a little bit about where the quotation came from. I didn't invent it. It came from Ruth Ginsburg, Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court, in her dissent in a decision that we report and talk about in the legal report called Epic Systems Corporation versus Lewis. And the short and long of it, of this particular case, is this, is that, as you know, or you may read about, there's this fad among employers, and in fact, the research tells us about 53% of the non-unionized employers in this country have now policies that require people that they hire, if they have any kind of a dispute with the boss, that they can't go to court. They have to arbitrate it. And that the individual employees got the obligation to bear that expense. Now, there's another, or out of that, I guess, 53%, about a third of the workforce in this country, a third of the workforce in this country, not only have policies issued by their employer that say they have to arbitrate and they can't go to court, can't go to a federal agency to fix a workplace problem. They have to arbitrate. But there's a third of that workforce in this country that also is under a policy that says they can't join with another employee in any kind of a collective or class action. Now, what does the National Labor Relations Act say? The National Labor Relations Act says that employees in this country have a right, a federal right, to engage in concerted activity. What does concerted activity mean? It means working together collectively with your fellow workers. That's a federal right. Epic Systems Corporation decision now says that private employers in this country can take away a worker's federal rights. Now you say, what the hell's that got to do with me? I deal with unionized employers. I represent unionized employees, organized employees. How does it apply to me? Well, think about it for a second. Who do you organize? You organize all those poor folks out there that are working for these non-union employers that are forcing them as a condition of their employment to give up substantial rights. Think about it. Think about what that policy does to that worker that doesn't have a contract. That policy that this decision upheld as being lawful policy, that yes, you can take away that federal right to engage in concerted activity in an employment policy. What does that do? What about the employer that consistently chisels somebody on paying overtime? Can an employee get together with his co-employee under the FLSA and sue the employer? No. Under that policy, they have to go to an arbitration. They're going to have to pay for an arbitration, and they're going to have to do it alone. What about the employer that systematically denies FMLA leave or fires people consistently who take the leave? What about Title VII? Systematic sex discrimination, race discrimination in employment decisions. Those people can't go to the EEOC anymore. Got to arbitrate it. Go whole list of protections that the United States Congress, the people of the United States, gave to working people. ERISA. What about the insurance companies that now chisel on the employer's coverage? Can you file an ERISA suit now? No, not if you're covered by that policy. You're an employee and you got to take it alone to an arbitration. And you know what Justice Ginsburg said, and what she said made absolute truth, was this, and accurate to a T. Why is there going to be this under-enforcement? Because a single employee acting alone just haven't got the money to do it. Hell, they probably don't have enough money to make the rent, to buy the food. And even if they don't, the employer is going to pick them out if they raise an issue in the workplace and fire them or do something worse. And even if somebody's got guts enough to fight the employer, to go the arbitration route, companies are going to figure, well, what the hell? So it's one small employee. We can take the hit. Why should we follow the law? We can take the hit. We can afford it. We got the money. Now, how in the, how do you make a happy story out of that? How do I honestly tell you life's good when that's what the state of American working people is? Well, I got an idea. And it's not an original one. In fact, I stole it. I was at a conference last week that Matt Glassen had put together for us lawyers in Iowa that represent unions. There aren't a whole lot of us. We did it in a small room. But it was very productive. And what struck me during the course of that meeting was we were talking specifically about what had happened with Chapter 20, what the legislature had done in gutting that particular law and taking away, I think the graphic this morning said 180,000 people's rights to collective bargaining in Iowa, public employees. Anyway, we were talking about that. And in the context of it, one of my colleagues who works for the Iowa State Education Association, who has pretty much absolutely all non-public safety employees, so they don't have any rights anymore to bargain, except at the mercy of school districts. He said, when all this struck and what we're doing is we're sending a simple message. And the simple message is that even though they've gutted our rights to collective bargaining, we're better if we stay together. We're better if we stay together. Think about that. Because it's so true. Think about it. In the private sector, for example, our numbers are down, have been for the last 20 years, going down and being down. But you know what? You know what a case like Epic Systems does for us? It used to be that our message was, well, you join our union and we can get you better this, better that. You know what the message is now and has to be now? It has to be, it's not pie in the sky. We're just trying to get back for you what the federal government gave you and what your employer took away from you as an American. And the only way you can do that is if you organize. Because it's only through organizing can you get rid of policies like a third of the workforce have to suffer through, or worse. And you know what else? You know what else you got for a message? Maybe you didn't catch it. We've been saying for I don't know how long that there's a relationship between union organizing and unionization of employers and income equality and inequality. There have been economists that have been saying that. We've been saying that. You get an occasional politician that says that. But you know what? Back in July, we just got some academics that said, oh, gee whiz, we found out that that's true, and we can prove it now. And that relationship has existed ever since the beginning of the National Labor Relations Act. It's a new message. But the only way people can get to the benefits of that message is if they stay together. Now, think about public sector employees in Iowa. Think about what happened to them. A whole bunch of them, in fact, the majority, vast majority of them now, can't bargain about anything except a base wage, whatever the hell that is, and PERB is telling us it ain't very much. Everything else is permissive. And so what are employers doing now in the public sector? They're saying, well, geez, don't worry, you know, we're not Scrooges, we're not going to totally take everything away from you, we'll make it a policy. Now think about that, those of you that work in the public sector. And think about two things. One is, first of all, at some point, those bright lawyers that represent public employers are going to figure out that, gee whiz, Epic Systems says we can make even public employees have to arbitrate individually all of their employment disputes with us, just like the private sector. But the second thing is this: when they put all of those policies or all those benefits into policies, we've got a new battleground. Think about it, a new battleground. We're not constrained by anything that we bargained for. They're constrained by what they put in their policies. Do you know what the definition of wages is under Chapter 91A of the Iowa Code? It includes not only wages, money for what you work, but also payments for holidays, sick pay, all kinds of benefits. And so what does that mean? That means that if the employer doesn't follow that policy, you can sue them. And what's the best way to sue an employer that's consistently, systematically not following its own policies? Collectively. Stay in together. Stay in together. Think about, did you ever think about this? A lot of you weren't around when public bargaining came into effect, or at least maybe you weren't paying attention. Before there was public bargaining, there was public bargaining. There were unions that were representing public employees. There were memorandums of agreement. Why do you suppose that was? That was because the politicians in those boards, those city councils, school districts, they wanted to make their employees happy, and they didn't want to have to deal with each of their individual employees and get accused of playing favorites or being unfair. Public bargaining was a benefit to them, made life easier. Think what you can do now if you're a public employee union. If you stay together, when they start evaluating people for wages, which you'll start doing pretty quick, because they're always into this merit stuff, right? You've got, under Chapter 91B, you've got a right for everybody to request personnel records. You've got a Chapter 22 right to get all kinds of information from that public employer, the open records law. You can make life miserable for them. And if you start doing that, and if you stay together so everybody's on the same page, they're going to get tired of that real quick. And maybe you'll get them at the table starting to talk about all those permissive things that they won't talk to you about now. Maybe, but you got to stay together. It's obvious, and we know it. It's a mantra of what we do in the labor movement. This whole idea of solidarity. We've seen what it can do in our own time. In Poland, you see what what can be done in some of the general strikes that occur places like France, where they shut down Paris. And they're general strikes. And we've seen more recently people venting their frustrations, teachers in various states, for example, going on strike to make a point about the need for better working conditions. That's the positive sign of what we've seen and what we know about staying together, that it's better to stay together. But we have to think about a couple of specific things in our own history, at least my personal history, and I think the history of many of you, or some of you, I better not say many, but some of you. The most important way we have to stay together is at the ballot box. It's at the ballot box. Because we didn't stay together in 1968. We didn't. We were divided. We were divided by the Vietnam War. We were divided by race relations issues. And what happened? We got Richard Nixon, who said he wasn't a crook. Richard Nixon. And the attack on the Supreme Court started seriously with Nixon and went on the next 40 years to where we are today. What about 1980? We weren't staying together again. Ronald Reagan bamboozled our membership. He was concerned about what the 80s foresaw and foretold: international competition, bankruptcies, consolidation of industries, loss of jobs. He captured something in our members. And so what did we get? The modern union-busting president, who was proud of it. A union president himself, who busted a union. And what happened in 2016? We have one shot. One. And it's in November. And it's a shot that if we miss, things only get worse. But if we hit, we can start to recover. We can start the long process of rebuilding, of using a new message, of winning battles in a new battleground. All because we stay together. Thank you.
These things I totally spaced out on today. Do new things.